This is Robert Kraft, and I'm your host on SNN.Network, and we are a proud media sponsor for the upcoming Precious Metals Summit Beaver Creek, which is being held virtually this year. Joining me right now is Daniel Earle. He is the president and CEO of Solaris Resources, publicly traded company. The symbol is SLS on the TSX Venture. Daniel, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
All right. That's great to hear, and thank you for joining again. So let's start with a very quick overview and history of the company, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Solaris, the way I describe it is a copper, gold growth and discovery story. This was spun out of Equinox Gold in 2018. Equinox, as you know, they're consumed with their goal of becoming a mid-tier gold producer. So they're going to something like 1 million ounces a year production over the next couple of years. And with Solaris, what they did is they partnered with the Augusta Group to surface the value in the asset package. Augusta, of course, has a totally unrivaled track record of value creation, totaling over $4.5 billion of exit transactions over the last 10 years. So the perfect partner for that kind of task. Now, we're backed by Equinox Gold, but we're also backed by Ross Beatty and Lucas Lundin. These are among the most successful players in the mining industry. They've made billions of dollars for shareholders over the years. Lucas Lundin in particular is important to us in Ecuador because of the tremendous job that Lundin Gold has done in bringing the FDN mine into production in a socially and environmentally responsible fashion. So they're really important for us in Ecuador. And then the final part of this story, which I always mention whenever I'm describing the story, is David Lowell. This was the world's greatest explorer. And this really, even though he's passed away just recently in May, this is his company. This is going to be the final chapter of his legacy that we write here. Our flagship project, Warintza in Ecuador, was his discovery. And our portfolio of exploration projects are his targets for future discovery. So that's the final piece of the Solaris story.
Well, I first want to express my condolences for your loss. I mean, it sounds like it was a tremendous loss for the entire mining community. So I just want to say that first off here. You know, and would you like to say a couple words about him? You know, let's give the audience a little more about who he was.
I mean, he's an absolute legend. I mean, this gentleman made more discoveries of greater consequence than anyone in history. We're talking about over a dozen major discoveries, including the biggest deposits in the world. Balo Alhambra, for example, was the biggest deposit in Argentina until recently. Zaldivar. Parina was $1 billion takeout in the 90s in Peru. He really opened up the gold potential in the country. Escondida, for example, was his discovery. This is by far the world's biggest copper mine, more than twice as big as the next largest copper mine. It did over 10 billion of revenue last year. I mean, that puts it on par with, like, for example, in iron ore, the entire district of the Pilbara in Australia, or the entire district of the Carajás in Brazil. So it's hard to really overstate David's significance to the industry. He's just an absolute legend. There's no other way to put it.
Well, thank you for saying that. You know, I just want to make sure that he's, you know, whether it's on here, and I'm sure you guys are doing an amazing job continuing on with his legacy. And I mean, really on that note, I mean, what did David and the company itself, what would you say makes this project, you know, that it was his discovery? What would you say he and you guys would say makes it unique and different compared to some of your peers out there?
I think in general, there's a scarcity of potentially developable, and I'm talking about really at early stage exploration through to, you know, kind of post feasibility. There's just a dearth of quality copper projects of scale out there to begin with. And this is relative to the kind of supply that the industry is going to need to generate for the future demand that we're forecasting just through, you know, basic economic growth, infrastructure growth. But then on top of that, superimposed is this mega trend of electrification of the grid, transport, et cetera. So there's just a dearth of projects. So we're talking about a handful of projects versus, you know, and we've done our own internal calculations, but there are other calculations that you could look at. Over 100 major new copper projects are going to have to come online this decade. So we really need the projects today, given the length of time that it takes to bring these projects on. So that's the context, okay, the backdrop that we have. But then when you look at the Warintza project, what you have is something that potentially, with a 5-kilometer trend of outcropping high-grade porphyry copper mineralization, has truly tremendous scale to it. And then it's got a high grade starter resource right at surface, 0.7 copper equivalent is, 50% higher grade than the average mined grade last year. And if you look at our first drill hole, 567 meters of over, or exactly 1% copper equivalent right from surface, you see that this is going to be, high grade and growing with high grades. So that's really what sets it apart.
And what's your background? How did you join on or become part of the Solaris story?
Yeah, I mean, by education, I'm a mining engineer, but I suppose my most recent experience for the last dozen years would be as a sell-side equity research analyst covering exploration and development stage and some producing stage companies in the mining sector, primarily focused on precious metals, but also base metals. And what I really made a name for myself on was calling world-class discoveries at an early stage. So taking relatively little information, a few drill holes or what have you, and then making the call that would eventually become a world-class discovery. And so over the course of my career, I averaged something like 1 takeout per year and a number of 10 and 20 baggers along the way. So that's really where I made a name for myself. Now, of course, I've moved over and I'm trying to do the same thing, only in industry.
And then from what you can tell us, what would you say are some of the company's value catalysts now moving forward for the rest of this year going into 2021?
The most important things are really just, demonstrating the growth of the Warintza Central area. Well, I mean, Warintza overall, but starting with Warintza Central. This is where we have our high-grade resource, and it's where we're drilling currently. And the opportunity there is to take, what was a very limited amount of drilling done by David Lowell in 2000 and 2001, and then to massively expand that with the more capital and the more powerful drills that we have access to today. And so that's what we've set out doing. We've obviously demonstrated significant growth at depth with our first drill hole, and we're just going to continue on that path of growing Warintza Central and then stepping out and hopefully making additional porphyry copper discoveries along the Warintza trend, which is a 5-kilometer long trend. And then eventually we'll get into the gold targets. We've got a series of 3 very large scale gold targets. These were not the low-hanging fruit for David, which was up on the ridgeline with the outcropping porphyry copper mineralization. These gold targets are down in the valley underneath cover, so he never got to them. But very exciting for us given the scale of those targets. So that's something that'll come, in the fall and into the winter for us.
And with that, where can my audience go and find everything they need to know about Solaris Resources?
SolarisResources.com, and I'm also on Twitter as well. You can find me if you look me up.
Very good. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe. And I look forward to our next update.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Again, my name is Robert Kraft. I'm your host on SNN.Network, and we are a proud media sponsor for the upcoming Precious Metal Summit Beaver Creek, being held virtually this year. Daniel will be there giving a presentation on Solaris Resources, and thank you all for watching.